With the emotion, I mean,
incidents and stuff, but well, I'll come later.
yeah, we could, hopefully you'll perhaps see some of it in the reading.
Yeah.
So the first passage we would like to read is the beginning of chapter 6, which describes her transport from Kyrgyzia to the north, to the Komi Republic.
By train, I assume?
Yes.
By train. And this is the longest of our readings. We're going to read 4 excerpts, so this is the longest one. The transport was going north. The destination was kept secret. No sooner had we been divided into groups and started boarding the train cars than our stamina and resourcefulness were put to the test. Within seconds, the car occupants arranged themselves into a visible hierarchy. The top bunk by the little barred window was taken by Natasha Shatalova, a tall, black-eyed Armenian. Her cronies, all convicted of petty theft, settled nearby. The escort guards ordered us to elect an elder and organize a duty roster for the night bucket. Natasha was elected. This was an apt choice, as even the guards were impressed by the beauty of this strong-willed woman. She spoke in a low mezzo-soprano voice and sang gypsy love songs. She had been imprisoned for theft during the war under the notorious Article 107. Many thought ahead to the distant camps and imagined fertile lands, but for the time being we had to adjust to the transport and endure the journey. In the middle of the car stood an iron stove, with a kettle on top and a few logs and a bucket of coal at its side. The floor, like the upper bunks, was covered in a thin layer of straw and served as the lower bunk. I found a spot in the corner, one of the worst. It was against the wall, and the cold made me shiver the entire journey. Some of the women were withdrawn and silent, but most had rowdy, unpredictable tempers. Brawls were constantly flaring up, and the bickering women had to be dragged apart. Only when the burjuika stove was heated would the women settle down, or else someone would start howling hysterically. A burly woman, imprisoned for murder, needed to unburden her heart. She would go from one woman to another, sit down next to them, and recount how she had grabbed the axe and swung it. More details followed, how the blood had splattered across the walls. She kept her nebulous eyes fixed on the listener, trapped in the wheel of a nightmare known only to herself. Whenever I awoke at night, I would see her sitting up, her empty eyes wide open, chained to her horror. The train was a heap of misery and neuroses, twisted, sick imaginations, and downright filth. For several days we moved slowly on, making numerous stops through Central Asia. Sometimes the train would be directed onto a side track, where the engine was shunted and the car shoved roughly to and fro before the wheels once again clattered onward. So much iron, so much cold around us. Rails, bolts, and bars, the grip of fate. We traveled a week, 8 days, 9 days. All of a sudden someone called from the upper bunks, "Russia, we're in Russia, look at the woods." We all took turns climbing to the upper bunk to peer through the little barred window. But in a moment the clamor ceased, and Natasha's loud whisper was heard. "Look, girls, so many cars with wounded men." Once again everyone climbed to the upper bunk. At the sight of the military trains, the women fell silent. One train with wounded soldiers rolled by us, then another. On the berths in the passenger cars lay crippled men with bandaged heads, arms, and legs. These trains carried forth unconsciousness, resignation, screams, and unrelenting pain. The bandaged, bloody misery of war. A long stop lay ahead of us in Sizren. We were allowed to wash, and the guards led us to town. Yes, we were in Russia. How different from Central Asia it was. The leaves of poplar and birch trees rustled gently, and a fresh wind ruffled our hair. Late May, still cool, fresh, and resonant. Each cell of my body was suffused with a painful memory. How could I have lived without this all? The Volga glimmered in the distance. It was the first time I'd seen the great river. We were taken to a real bathhouse. Water flowed from 1, 2, 3 taps. Its very availability was enough to drive you mad. For months we had been covered in dirt, and now we washed ourselves with the tiny pieces of soap we had each been given, rinsed ourselves, and poured water over our bodies again and again, until we grew weak with happiness. How strange it felt to be clean! And again the cold, the rattling of wheels, the restless rhythm of a slow journey. After Sizinin, our bread ration was delayed, and soon we didn't get any more at all. There is no bread, they told us. You've no right to leave us without bread, yelled Natasha. Rifle butts slammed against the door from the outside. Natasha's charms no longer worked on the guards. A military train, bound for the front, stopped on the track next to ours. At first, the soldiers didn't realize what kind of freight our train was carrying. They leaned out of the windows and started teasing us. Hey there, cuties, where's the party? No one replied, but Natasha turned away from the cherished window, jumped to the floor and started pounding on the wall. We're starving. Where's our bread? Give us our bread, she screamed in a fury, fed on hunger. Her explosive screams hammered on our nerves, caught on and spread to others. Soon our whole car was pounding and screaming, then the next, then a third. Hundreds of pounding fists could be heard from within 20 cars as the entire trainload thrashed against the walls and doors of these cells on wheels. Give us our bread, we're hungry. Bread, bread. The screaming grew into a roar. We yelled not with our throats, but with our empty stomachs, in the wild hopes that someone would protect us. Outside, the guards and officers ran back and forth. They were getting agitated and tried to calm us down, but it was too late. The prisoners were on the verge of shattering the train into splinters. The men in the military train were watching. We could see them exchanging remarks with each other. They finally realized what kind of train was standing alongside theirs. Several officers sprang out of the train and approached the escort commanders. These women are entitled to their rations. Give them their bread. Who holds the highest rank here? The transport commander obsequiously suggested to the officers that they follow him to his car for an explanation. Bring the documents here. Explain it all in their presence, an officer objected, his tone becoming openly hostile. You have no right to starve people. At the sound of his insistent voice, our entire train grew silent. Whose side are you taking, comrade? The escort commander tried to put the officer to shame. Who do you think you're fighting for? Criminals! After a moment of dead silence, we heard the outraged shout of our defender. The answer seemed startling. Who are we fighting for? For our mothers and wives who could be in that train. As if a pickaxe had broken through my calloused soul, I lay motionless in my corner on the floor, holding my mouth shut so as not to allow a helpless and frightening howl. Yes, yes, we are innocent. We've been tortured and we don't understand why. The transport commander was adamant. You're making a little mistake, comrade. But the front soldiers wouldn't back down. Bring over the documents and be quick about it. We are returning from hospitals to the front line and must be certain that everything is in order at home. The military train shuddered and moved off. The women exploded. From deep within them, a mixture of feminine tenderness and obscenity broke forth. Hey, Curlyhead, you can have me, a voice cried out to her invisible defender. Ah, you and I, we could... The equally candid replies of the departing soldiers were becoming less and less audible. Come back safe from the war, boys, called the women. And the trains rolled apart, each in its own direction. Theirs toward war and bullets, ours to a different hell.
The next passage, where I would allow myself to jump in for one paragraph reading in the Russian original, is from the second half of the book, where the scene described immediately precedes the arrival of the theater to Central Camp, to one of the camps where Tamara Petkevich was at the time, and immediately precedes her meeting Nikolai Teslik. So I will just read one paragraph to give you the sense of how it sounds. Иногда, просыпаясь ночью, сунув ноги в кирзовые сапоги, я выходила во тьму. Гремели цепью о проволоке, привязанной к ней за кольцо овчарки. Сырой туман мешался с запахом спиленных стволов. Доносился все тот же господствующий над тайгой, изнывающий крик паровоза с далеко отстоявшей от нас железной дороги. Протяженность пространства превращала его в истошный призыв к единству, бездомные, одинокие души.
So I'll read.
Translation?
Yeah, this is... Enigmas to ourselves. By the way, the paragraph that Yasha read is the second paragraph that I'll be reading from here. So, enigmas to ourselves. We are shaped less by our own biographies than by the sacred matter from which we all descend. During the special time of recovery after a fresh round of pain, nature would offer me some new point of reference. Reference to what precisely, I could not say. But a blade of grass breaking through the soil, the forest beyond the camp, the ever-changing sky, would appear new and slightly unfamiliar, and I would start to hear and see the world in a different way. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night, pull on my boots and venture out into the darkness. The chains of the tethered guard dogs clattered along the wire. The smell of freshly sawed tree trunks blended with a clammy fog. The plaintive wail of a distant locomotive echoed across the taiga's vast expanse, turning into a heart-rending cry for all the lonely and homeless souls. I would sneak out of the medical barracks and run to the western side of the zone, fatally drawn to that border between freedom and captivity. Standing on a little hillock, peering through the wire fence, I could glimpse a bend in the western Dvina River that flowed past the camp. The setting sun would imbue the sky with delicate tones that grew gloomier by the minute. I feasted my eyes on the water and stretched out my hands toward its freshness. After rain, water droplets would hang in rows on the barbed wire. Searchlights from the watchtowers swept across the zone, illuminating the perfect little spheres as they succumbed to their own weight and plummeted down into puddles. The cold wind made me shiver, but I stood in the slushy mud, listening to everything around me breathe and reverberate. Everything was pulsating with life, and I was part of it all. My soul stirred in response to these sparing signs of renewal, and I began once again to feel the world that existed beyond the confines of my individual destiny.
The third passage is also very short, and it describes the irony of the actors' attempt to negotiate their program with the camp authorities.
The end of 1947 was marked by a slight weakening of the regime. Despite the particulars of some of the gifted prisoners' sentences, Tech had less trouble drawing them into the collective, and the directors had more luck petitioning on behalf of professional actors who were arriving on transports. To get an official approval for concert programs, which required a great deal of persistence and diplomacy, Sanya would personally go to the political department. "What's this nonsense?" the head of the political department would ask, poking his finger into the program. "What rubbish this song is. Wanders the lonely accordion." "Why rubbish, Nikolai Vasilievich? It's a good song, very melodious." "Tell me, where in our Soviet villages have you ever seen a lonely accordionist? A crowd of kolkhozniks always accompanies him. Cross it out." By hook or by crook, Sanya would stubbornly fight for this or that song or performance. "What's this thing called Dawn by Leon Cavallo?" Stanko asked him. "Well, you know, it's about Aurora," Sanya answered. "All right, we need a song about the Aurora. Keep it." But when Stanko heard the romance sung by Camille during the concert, he grew enraged. "I didn't approve this. What's he singing?" Sanya explained to him what the song was about. "What goddess of dawn are you talking about? There's only one Aurora, the battleship. You've got to stop these tricks of yours."
Alright, and the last part of our presentation before we are really looking forward to the questions, of course, is just a very short slideshow of photographs and drawings